Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. My name is Peter Englert. We are brought to you by the Lumavaz Network out of Saddleback Church. We are also brought to you by Browncroft Community Church. We exist to respond to the questions you don't feel comfortable asking in church. And Gage, my co-host today, and we want to thank our producer Nathan. We are still in the series, Why Do You Still Follow Jesus? We brought all the way in from Webster, New York, our friend,
such a drive,
compadre, Rich Christman. Yeah. What do you, before he introduces himself, anything you want to say about Rich?
So, we were actually years and years ago here at Browncroft together.
Yeah. Part
of this little, Christian Boy Scouts
pretty much
type thing called Stockade. That is where we originally know each other from.
You taught me how to play Ghost in the Graveyard.
Oh gosh, wow.
Yeah, I have a visceral memory of it.
That makes one of us.
I think I was maybe in fourth grade. Yeah. Good times.
But I got reintroduced to Rich just 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
After moving back to Rochester from New York, and bumped into him at an event, which gets into his introduction by Forefront, which is a local nonprofit committed to fostering the arts. And since then, we've become good friends again, better than before, I'd say.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Super glad to have him.
One more quick joke. I mean, we have the Grove City College, and Josh Eisenhart, who's a friend of the podcast, is of course goes to the rival Geneva College.
Does he? Or did he? I didn't even know that.
Anyways, that's deep cuts for you. But
that
Rich,
explains a lot about Josh and my relationship. That just existed. Yeah.
We could title this, Why Would I Go to Grove City Instead of Geneva? But anyways, Rich,
I'll come back on for that.
Before we go down that rabbit trail, why don't you just give us a brief intro of who you are, where you're from, and what you're currently doing right now?
Yeah. Gage did a good job starting that off. So I am from here. No, this very room. No, I'm from, born and raised here in Rochester. I grew up here at Browncroft Church until I was in about 9th grade. And then my family moved to another church, and I've hopped around a bit since then. But probably, a lot of points of connection with you guys for that reason. But I am. So I did move away for some time. I went to Grove City College in Pennsylvania, and I lived in Pittsburgh for a short time. Moved back to Rochester in 2018 to take a high school teaching job. So I'm a high school teacher now here in the Rochester area. I teach high school English. Love that. So so I do that. And then I also am the co-leader of Forefront, as Gage mentioned. So we focus on authentic Christian faith and excellence in the arts. And we try to foster and platform and encourage and equip authentic Christians to produce beauty and to, quote, create in light of their creator. So kind of splitting my time, it's probably, these are not split in 3 ways evenly, but I have the English teaching life, I have the Forefront life, and I have an 8-month-old son at home and a lovely wife, Missy. So the family is really a big part of it now. Kids learning how to crawl, he sings now.
Oh, wow.
It's really great. So
before Gage goes super, super serious, we didn't talk about this.
Wow.
Let's go.
Let me ask you some quick hitting questions.
Yeah.
Just to have some fun. An author of fiction that we should read that no one tells you to read.
Ooh. All right.
He's a good one for this.
Yeah. So especially in the Christian circle, this is specifically to Christian listeners, viewers. You probably heard of Neil Gaiman. So he wrote Sandman and American Gods and Good Omens and things like that. But he has been called by many kind of like the heir of C.S. Lewis, and not a Christian, but very, very, let's say, eternity minded. So he's extremely well, researched in ancient mythologies and belief systems and stuff, and he really weaves that into his work. And he's said that in his in his fiction works, he says that he absolutely believes that there is a God and an afterlife and a beyond. He just like believe, he hasn't ascribed to a particular one. Grew up in a Christian environment, but anyway, his books very much model kind of like the C.S. Lewis fiction style for like a more contemporary time. So I definitely recommend anybody who likes those sort of books. I recommend Coraline and American Gods the most. Yeah,
it's a thorough response.
That's
a good
good.
one.
English teacher. Yeah.
A play that you have never directed or conducted that you want to in the future.
Yeah. So people that know me, I have always wanted to direct Death of a Salesman because I just think it's a classic. I think it's so cool. But I actually have a better answer than that for now. I recently read the old play A Doll's House by Heinrich Ibsen, and I'd never read it before. I read it for the first time just like a couple weeks ago. I was really, really struck by it, and so now I'm really jazzed up about directing A Doll's House at some point in the future.
Last one,
Yeah.
and then we'll throw to Gage. Mm-hmm. Who has the best garbage plate in Rochester?
Oh boy. I really like I don't know if this is the best in Rochester, but I really like Webster Hots on Ridge Road in the village of Webster. I feel like their burgers are cooked like, you know how sometimes on a garbage plate the burger's not as good as if you like ordered a burger, like the burger, it doesn't feel like as well cooked. It feels like all the elements in the Webster Hots plate are cooked how they should be before they're garbaged together, But I got to go with Webster Hots on that one.
So listeners, if you're not from Rochester, imagine everything wrong on a plate that would give you a heart attack. That's what a garbage plate is.
Yeah. I don't have a garbage plate often, but when I do, it's like a special. It's like having Thanksgiving. Like, you know how you like let yourself go on Thanksgiving? I have a garbage plate maybe like 3 times a year, maybe. But like when I do, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Now we're going to talk about deconstruction.
Kind of like a deconstructed plate.
Yeah, it's a thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Well, let's get into it. Mm-hmm. So, like we said, we share some pretty humorous, deep church background that we could, maybe roll our eyes at bits and pieces, but also maybe be grateful for others.
Sure.
But to get us into your story a bit further, share a little bit more about your faith journey as you grew up and got older.
Yeah. So there's a lot of strands here, so I'm going to try to keep it, as sensible as I can. But so I grew up so as far as my memory goes, I grew up at Browncroft here and had a absolutely fantastic childhood as a member of the church. Like, I have nothing but fond memories of my as far back as I can remember through my elementary years and like middle school years here at Browncroft. Absolutely cultivated a real faith here. We had were you part of Bible Steppers?
I wasn't.
Okay. So
a
bunch of a group of parents in like I guess probably like early 2000s, I would say, put together like a Sunday school class here at Browncroft where like it was, like optional. You could sign up for it. And they called it Bible Steppers. I don't know if they had a curriculum or not. It's a long time ago, but we, we were young kids and they taught us like through books of the Bible. And I learned a ton through that. And it was a rotating, like different parents would take different weeks and stuff. And so like Browncroft facilitated that. I don't know the details. I was 10 years old, but I remember learning a lot from that. Like a lot of my foundation of my faith came from that and from Stockade and, all sorts of different, the VBSs here at Browncroft, unmatched. I don't know if they still are, but they were, man, it's like Disney World when I think back to it. But anyway, good times. So also just like some other factors in there, my, shortly before I can remember, but like when I was young in my life, my parents were from a Catholic background. So my dad, in particular, was pretty committed to being Roman Catholic. So there's elements of that kind of like existed in my parents' faith, and a lot of my faith kind of growing up, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I can see it now. A lot of I guess, opinions maybe that I was introduced to about like, elements of the Christian faith were very much reactionary to the Catholic understanding. So, like whatever questions like, what is communion? Like I think I was raised not just by my parents, but by I think a lot of people in my circle at the time. The answers to those questions were very much like calculated in reaction to the Catholic response that was disagreed with. So that was there. But
hold on one second, just for our listeners, like you're talking about transubstantiation. I probably messed that up. Where I think the Catholic belief that that the bread and the wine actually become part of the body, whereas the Protestant is symbolism. If you're a theologian, I just try to give probably a couple 100-year doctrinal,
right.
Just
and like the idea too that like most like even lowercase c Catholic churches, right, that are connected to the more historic church, like Presbyterian and Anglican and stuff, look at communion or the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist as like the center of the Christian experience. Whereas growing up in a more like non-denominational evangelical environment, like communion was like a great tradition that we did, but like I definitely didn't grow up thinking that communion was like an essential center point of the Christian experience, so just things like that. Also things about baptism. Like I remember like I had like friends growing up who like were going to their baby sister's baptism. And I was like, why is your baby sister being baptized? She can't make that decision, so things like that. But anyway, so I grew up very plugged in to my evangelical Christian faith as a young kid. We did switch churches when I was like in early high school, and I had a really difficult time. Some people, you probably had this experience. I had a really difficult time. Like I was very connected with friends here at Browncroft, went to a new church that was much smaller and older, as you'll see if you leave a large evangelical church for a smaller, more traditional church. And I had a really difficult time making friends. And in kind of like a rebellion that I didn't see as a rebellion at the time, but like I was like annoyed that we went to a new church. I was like a teenager, like wanted to stay with my friends. I really like unplugged. So even though I was a regular church goer and I was like participant in youth group and stuff in high school, I was emotionally and spiritually not there, So I think, and I really thank God for that tremendous foundation that I had, because I don't think I grew too much in like the high school years. So funny thing, I won't drop any names because like person also went to Browncroft. You probably know them, but anyway, so I had this like rivalry in high school with this girl that went to high school with me that also grew up with us at church. And my dad will deny this to this day, but I think she was like better at school and like, whatever than I was. And I remember this like rivalry where like I felt like my dad would always be like, well, so-and-so did this or like whatever, why don't you do that? And I always felt like I was competing. So she said, we were like juniors or seniors, I don't remember. And she said like, we're talking about college or something. And then she said like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to go to Grove City College. And I swear I did not wear this shirt as an ad. I just wore it today. But anyway, she's like, I'm going to go to Grove City College. I had never heard of it. No one in my family had heard of it. Christian private college in Pennsylvania, if you're unaware. Anyway, so I'm like, never heard of it. And my dad looks it up and is like, my dad was a teacher in my high school. That's why he was there. And he's like, he looks it up and he's like, oh, that's great. That looks really cool. And he's like giving her all this praise for wanting to go there. And so immediately I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I'm going there. Like, that's it. You know what I mean? And so the funny part is I went to Grove City College because I wanted to like one up this girl for no reason. But anyway, so by God, but actually that's not for no reason, because it kind of brings me to this point that I'm making. I absolutely think, and there's a lot of details that'll go into this if you're interested, but I absolutely think that God, I'm a firm believer that even the smallest doors that we open in our lives are directed by God for a purpose. And I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that God put certain steps in my life so that I would end up where I am now. And I think kind of my stumbling my way to Grove City College was a huge part in that journey. So I went to Grove City College out of spite. And I got there, met some great people, had a really good time starting off as a freshman. And then due to like a couple different factors of various things, like academically, socially, stuff going on at home, like all different sorts of things. The second half of my freshman year of college and my sophomore year, of college, I really fell into a really bad place emotionally and spiritually. And I felt very, one of the reasons why I really think that spiritual, I don't know if this is too much, but like spiritual forces or whatever, it sounds heavy, but like were very prevalent in my life at this time, because when I look back at that season, which was probably about a year and a half long, I was in a really bad place. I was certainly depressed. My grades were terrible. I was making really clearly stupid decisions, like socially and stuff like that in school, morally as well. And I remember and it's funny because it's one of those things where you feel like you're having like an out of body experience where you're looking at your own life and you're like, this is dumb, but you just like continue anyway. And like, I felt like very like beside myself, which just made things increasingly worse. And the other thing is I knew in the back of my mind this whole time in this like disembodied experience, right, that I should reach out to God. Like I knew I felt like God's presence with me the whole time, but in this way where I was like, I knew in the back of my mind, like I should pray about this. I should like reach out to God about this. I was not attending a church regularly. I was like, I should go to church. Maybe I should talk to somebody at a church about this. Whatever. I knew all of this. Like I remember my brain kind of like feeding me these things and just consciously rejecting those thoughts, and I grew up in a world where like prayer was something that was not a big deal. Like you shoot up a prayer really quick on your way to, in the shower or whatever. Right. So it's not like I felt like there was this big, like, oh, I got to formally pray. I got to go to church. I got to, anything like that. It was like as simple as like asking God for help. And I just didn't want to do it. I just felt this barrier there.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is a good, so I resonate with like the sophomore slump.
Yeah.
And like just kind of, I think sometimes we get into these series. So Gage and I interviewed Glenn Pearson, who, I mean, just his family life just was terrible.
Yeah.
Like go listen to the episode. We think about Mark Goodman, his family life was terrible. And I resonate with you in the sense of like, I can't pinpoint the dark night of my soul of exactly why.
Yeah.
I can tell you, like, I love Valley Forge where I went to college. I didn't feel connected. And some of that was, I was probably more connected than I thought.
Yeah.
I live with this narrative in my soul. Someday we'll probably, I just don't belong.
Yeah.
But like, I was making these bad decisions, like, eating 2 half-priced appetizers at Applebee's, and like I gained 40 more
bad
pounds.
decisions.
Yeah,
oh, that's a bad
like a good one.
I mean to take the frozen. Nothing against Applebee's, but like I can't like pinpoint this terrible thing. But I can just I don't know if it was a new place. I don't know if it was what am I doing here. I mean, if you could kind of go back, you're saying you're having this out of body. Is there a moment? Is there a thing? Or
well, I don't know if there's a moment, but I can tell you. See, I wasn't even planning on going this deep here, but I can tell you that there were. I don't know about a moment, but there were 3 factors that brought me down, like 3 hopefully metaphorical demons in my life. Right. I went to a Christian, so people that are considering whether to send your children to a Christian school, I went to a Christian college, and I desperately wanted to be unique and have an identity that was interesting so I could make friends. and it sounds so silly, like in retrospect, but if you go to a Christian school, the easiest way to make yourself unique and interesting is to be contrary to the Christian faith. So I felt this like deep inner desire to be different. And I did that. Like, you can really stir up some controversy at a school like Grove City if you start claiming that you're buying into like just very like left and right of center theologies, like open theism or like or universalism or like things like that. I remember reading like a bunch for a while about like Islam, but not in a way because I truly was interested in like considering Islam. It was like, oh, if I'm sitting in the student union with like a Quran, people are going to be like, whoa, that guy's interesting. Like, that's what I thought, you know what I mean? And it did work to some degree, but I think I made friends with the people that you don't go to a Christian college to make friends with. You know what I mean? Like, I think that was a negative thing. And the other two kind of elements, which are, I think, like less obviously nefarious maybe, but worked out negatively, was I was dating someone from high school and moved away. And I think that I was I didn't even give myself the chance to be fully present where I was because I was just, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like long distance dating, right? But like, you have to, if you're going to long distance date, you have to take the effort to be as much as you can present in both places at both times, right? Or like split that in a healthy way, where I feel like I was never present at that time where I should have been, you know what I mean? And that was really bad. And then the other like kind of third element was I definitely, in that dating relationship and like elsewhere, I definitely, like many college kids do, I definitely went down that like kind of moral slippery slope where I kind of allowed myself to like experiment with things and then also be like, oh, I'm not immediately reaping a negative consequence. So all those things that I was told about how this thing is bad for you must not be true. But of course, like, I'm not an idiot. I believe that I was saved this whole time, possibly. I'm not sure, but I feel that way. So like, I had like a conscience. I feel like I had the Holy Spirit. Like, I can remember making really dumb decisions that I knew were destructive and having the conversation in my head and being like, this is bad. It's going to hurt you. It disappoints God. Like, all these things. And me just being like, just cramming that down and like acting like that wasn't real. So anyway, to answer that question, I don't think there's like a particular moment, but I think that allowing myself to not try to be present where I was, desperately desiring an identity that was not found in Christ or in my true identity as a Christian. And then basically taking gambles with things that I knew were sinful and dangerous. So those kind of three elements are what brought me there.
Gage is probably going to ask that question, but you just had me thinking, my favorite show that should have gotten extended next year was Freaks and Geeks. And there's this very classic scene where they're at the dinner table. I think they're talking about smoking or drinking. And like the dad's response is, well, Aunt so-and-so used to smoke and drink. You know what happened to them? They died.
Yeah.
It just, it felt like that kind of, like, I don't think the people we grew up with, the adults, the leaders in our life, intended to do that. But that scene resonates because it's like, you're going to read a book on open theism. You know what happens to people who read it? You're going to die
eternally. Yeah. And I remember too, like, very much the feeling, even though I knew, like I said, that it wasn't true, there was very much that lie in my ear that, like, you know, if you do this, you're going to die. And I did it and I didn't die.
Yeah.
So it must be fine. You know, like that sort of thing. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. So to kind of like on the upslide though. So that was happening when I was in college, pretty dark time. When I think back to it, it's actually like funny because it feels so distant now. That like next fall will be like my 10 years out of college. So hasn't been like that long, but like it feels tremendously distant. because I feel like I'm a different person. Like it feels very different. But anyway, so I'm in this really bad place. I'm considering dropping out of school at this time. And I'm being told by a professor that I really respect. I will never forget this. He pulls me into his office and says, if you end this semester the way that you ended the last couple, he's my advisor. And he's like, I'm going to recommend you be removed from school. And I remember it just like, and I was a straight A student in high school, like very shocking to hear that. Like it just wasn't who I was. And that was a little bit of a wake up call, but not enough to like really turn the gears. So this brings me to why am I involved in Forefront and stuff, right? So I'm going to drop out of school. I have no plans. My relationship with my parents is iffy at this point because they're really disappointed and confused, and all this sort of stuff. And there's really I have no idea what's going on. And this one professor that I have for a random class, like not even a core class, she is also the director of the theater at the school. She directs 2 shows a year. And to this day, I don't understand why she did this, but like, thank God she did. So she starts having a conversation with me one day in class about different like jobs that are necessary to make a historical play, work, right? And we're talking about that. And so if you're unfamiliar with drama, there's a position called the dramaturg, and there's a study called dramaturgy, which is essentially doing research to maintain the historical and aesthetic accuracy of a play that takes place in a particular time or place. Yeah. So she's talking to me about dramaturgy, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. Never heard anything of it before, whatever. I guess I expressed like some interest or whatever. Out of the blue, no evidence that I could pull this off. In fact, only evidence to the contrary. Like, I think I was doing poorly in her class. She asked me if I wanted to be the dramaturg and assistant student director for the spring play. And I was like completely taken aback. Like I was like, I don't do that. Like I don't do theater, whatever. And she was like, I think you can do it. And like it was almost like she like knighted me. Like she like she was like, because I say so, you can do this, right? And I remember thinking, okay, this sounds like fun, but then slowly that evolved into, I must do this because she chose me to do it. And like, I won't let her down. You know what I mean? And I had like barely a relationship with her at this time. So long story short, she took this chance on me for no apparent reason at the time. And I tucked fully into doing this research for this play we were doing. It's John Logan's Red. Fantastic play. Anyway, so I'm doing all this research, hours at night, working in her office, researching stuff, giving her reports of like what I'm finding, working with the actors, talk about these things, the set designers, all this stuff. And then I start noticing that I'm doing like, I picture this as like a montage, like a movie in my head, all the music's playing on.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's happening. I start realizing that like, oh wait, when I do a bunch of research and, show the actors what I found or whatever, that's effective. Why don't I do that for my classes as well? So then I start like applying that same effort in like elsewhere as well. My grades start going up. I start making real authentic friendships by working with these people, like co-laboring with people towards some end, right? I start to build like authentic friendships. And like literally every negative pattern that was happening starts turning around, like because of this one offer that was given to me, right? An offer I didn't deserve at all. And then meanwhile, that's happening, all this is happening. We're working on the show, blah, blah, blah. As I'm working on the show, she recommends that I take this spring class on basically just like aesthetics or like the philosophy of beauty. And so that semester, I immersed myself in working on this beautiful play and studying what God and the canon of like world philosophers have thought about beauty. And long story short, I fell in love with God all over again in a completely new way and felt so energized and connected to God by creating something beautiful and giving it to someone else in the form of producing awesome stuff for these actors and set designers or whatever, then putting on that show and watching people come and see it and experience something that they could not have experienced if we had not labored for it. You know what I mean? And so I felt that, for lack of a better word, I felt like a kinship with the divine that I had never felt before. Like, I get why God created man now, you know, like, and that was just huge. So ever since then, I've just had this thirst for beauty and truth. And I think that is the way that we see God most. And so I've gone on a journey since then. I plugged back into church during that season as well. And I started going to churches where I found the most beauty. And I grew tremendously as a Christian in the following, 5 years or so. Moved back here to Rochester. I go to Grace Road Church here in Rochester. Love it there. Beautiful building over there.
Yeah.
No, but I'm sure that we can direct this where
Yeah,
you
no,
want to go,
thanks so much to get into there. Thanks for sharing all that. So that last bit, there's two pieces I want to hit on here. But first, that last bit, you're talking about how you say it was both encountering, experiencing, seeing beauty in a new way, and the experience of participating in creation. Kind of birthed this new thirst in you. Yeah. That ultimately, and then you kind of said that bit quickly, kind of brought you back to church and seeking it there. Can you dig into that a little bit? How did that push you towards church again?
So what's the name of the series again?
Why do I still follow Jesus?
Okay. So so
essentially your episode is why do I still follow Jesus? Christianity is beautiful.
Yeah. So why? So the reason why I asked that is because why do I still follow Jesus? Because he is the most beautiful thing that has ever existed. And I am absolutely convinced now that he is the source of all beauty. So I am absolutely enamored with beautiful things. And I am absolutely convinced that they're only beautiful because he pours himself into them. Everything that's beautiful in the world is that way because he has put himself in there. Yeah.
How'd you get there? Walk us a little more through that season. How'd you get there from a course on aesthetics and being, co-director of this play?
Yeah. So, it's hard to answer that question without breaking down the philosophy of aesthetics. But basically, no. But
give us a taste.
Yeah. So the idea that, so in, and this has happened throughout history, right? But in post-Enlightenment Europe, so modern Western Europe, there's a ton of discussion about what is beauty, why is beauty, does beauty matter? A lot of discussion about that, and this is referred to as aesthetics, right? So while a lot of philosophers in this era were very questioning of the existence of God, Europe at that time was largely, almost entirely informed by Christian thought, right? So this idea that things that are beautiful, why are things beautiful in the world? They're beautiful whether you're Christian or not, right? What is beauty? Beauty is things that are orderly. They're ordered, they're structured, they're predictable, they're resonant, they're cordant. So music that is you play a number of notes that sound well together, right? That's cordance. And then in the things that are beautiful are balanced, right? And then we also find contrast beautiful. And we find contrast beautiful because it's drama. So if you look at a piece of visual art that has a tremendous amount of contrast, why is that arresting to you? It's the same reason why we love Revenge of the Sith, man. Because there's drama and pain, right?
Do we love Revenge of the Sith?
We do. I don't know about you, but that I was trying to think of something that most people have seen that's very dramatic. So anyway, that sort of thing. And then I started realizing through the study of aesthetics, right, that all forms of creativity, be it fine art, music, literature, painting, right, but also cooking and home repair and all these things, right, are all ways that we bring order and balance to a world that has been deconstructed by the fall of man and the entrance of sin into the world. So once I realized that, like, wait a minute, the work of the artist or the creator or anybody, like even if you're like a lawn maintenance person, right?
Yeah.
Why do we maintain our lawns? Because we're bringing order and balance to a world that is unbalanced and chaotic and has thorns and weeds and stuff like that, right? So if you're unfamiliar with kind of Christian aestheticism, right? The idea that it is part of the mandate that God gave Adam and Eve, and then even more so the mandate that God gave the disciples, the Great Commission as well, I think can be translated to the fact that God created a perfect world that was beautiful in every way. And then due to the fall of man, the world has been invaded by an ungodly nature, an antichrist nature has invaded the world. And God will one day restore all things, not only to how they were in the garden, but into a better place than the better way than they were in the garden. And what will make them better? The fact that humanity will be there in a perfected way. And the work that we have done to co-labor with God to restore the world will be there. So everything that we do to, like when you sweep your kitchen floor, you're actually doing art. When you sweep the floor, you are taking away chaos and discord from God's creation to make it more beautiful. And we do that in, it's easy to see how that's done when you take like a rundown old house or something, and then you hire an excellent interior designer and an awesome craftsman team to make a rundown old house into like this beautiful, whatever your style is, right? Picture it in your mind, right? We can see how that's like, wow, that's like, but that's what God does. He takes broken stuff and puts balance and color and drama and truth into them and makes them what they're meant to be.
So that's extremely deep and remarkable.
Thank you.
But that's not the end of your first deconstruction, Dark Night of the Soul. It seems like that's...
Okay, sorry, I'm not answering your question.
Oh, no. You answered Gage's question, but
okay.
I think I want to kind of bring us back to kind of where...
Actually, let me really quick. I think the answer to your question, which I should have just started with. No, I should have just started with how did that how did that become what I was just talking about, right?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is I didn't feel like I had anything to live for until I understood that what we're all living for is helping to participate with God's restoration of the world. So now I see everything as participation with that. So that's what happened.
So that's actually a perfect segue because I think some people feel like I go through a season of doubt. I go through a season of deconstruction.
Yeah.
I go through that. I'm good. Mm-hmm. And you can come to that conclusion. I'm part of this grand master story and drama. But you've experienced one within the last 5 years or so.
Yeah. So I have like toyed around for drama's sake with the term deconstruction. So I'm assuming this is what you're getting at. I've had like
and
what I can call...
Bring us up to speed for the listeners on timeline. So we're just talking about your new encounter with God and beauty.
Yeah.
That was when?
Let's say like 2013, So about like 10 years ago.
Okay.
You get married,
Yeah. So
Pittsburgh, moved back to Rochester.
So life was awesome after that point. Got something to live for. Got an awesome social circle now. Going to church, plugged into an awesome church. Graduated college. Things are going well. Connected with my now wife, who went to Grove City, but we didn't know each other there, ironically. So that's awesome. Things are looking up. I decided to pursue being an English teacher. Love literature, love young people. It just worked out. I went back to school for that. I went to Roberts Wesleyan here in Rochester for my master's degree. That's all happening in this kind of time period. I'm really plugged into my faith during this time. And then, so during this whole season, I'm attending an Anglican church, a member of an Anglican church. That is, if you're a theology, church history nerd, it was an ACNA church plant, so conservative wing of the Anglican church. I was attracted to it because of its historic nature and its deep focus on beauty. I forget who said this, but a like church historian said that the thing that differentiates Protestant denominations is their second book. So the idea is Protestants hold the Bible above either prima or sola scriptura, right? And then there's a second book that they use. So like the Presbyterians use like the Westminster Catechism. The Lutherans use the Book of Concord, right? And the Anglicans use the Book of Common Prayer. So I remember being absolutely struck by the fact that like there's this beautiful book of extremely orderly, effectively poetry, It's like an extension of the Psalms, and I was like, this is just beautiful. And then not only the fact that like, C.S. Lewis and so, but yeah, evangelicals, love to identify with C.S. Lewis, but like C.S. Lewis would not be happy with evangelicals. He was a hardcore high church Anglican, big Eucharist guy. Anyway, no
smoking machines, but anyway.
Yeah. But anyway, so I've always been like enamored with like that sort of thing. But I'm going to an Anglican church. I got confirmed in that church. And actually like participated as a lay minister, helped with the sacraments, and stuff like that, which was just a beautiful season. Like, I feel like I just grew tremendously in that time. But during that, I'm also kind of exposed to, I don't know if this is the right term, but what I'm going to call historic Christianity. And I'll define what I mean by that. What I mean is I started learning, like by conversation and listening to podcasts and whatever, that the belief that I had grown up with, which I'm going to kind of lump together, I'm sure I'm going to bother somebody with this, but like kind of like the like Baptist evangelical non-denominational way of seeing Christianity was very new in the history of Christianity. So while Baptists love to point to the fact that there have been effectively Baptists from the very beginning of the church history, and granted, the vast majority of organized Christianity, be it Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox or otherwise, have all agreed on a number of main tenets. So like even high church Protestants, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Anglicans agree on arguably more things with the Catholic and Orthodox Church than they do with the evangelical faith I grew up with. So here comes my deconstruction. So starting in probably 2016 or 2017, I really deeply encountered this through a close friendship with a Byzantine Catholic priest. Weird circumstance how we became friends, but that's for another story. But so I started hanging out with this guy like multiple times a week, and we're just talking. He invites me to his church. He's a seminarian at Cyril and Methodius Byzantine Seminary in Pittsburgh, whatever. And he basically just, among other people, opens my eyes to the fact that my version, my interpretation of Christianity is like only like 50 years old, like 50, 60 years old. And I realize this is arguable, right? But it feels like I'm like knocked on, off my feet by this reality. I'm like, wait a minute. So, and like the joke I just made about C.S. Lewis, it like rocked me when I started to realize that heroes of the Christian faith that I admire would probably not even consider me a Christian because my theology has gone so astray from, and before you think where I'm going, right? I have reconciled these things now, I think.
Yeah.
But like at the time, I'm thinking, if I met C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien or, even people like Charles Spurgeon, like people that a lot of us admire.
Quote, yeah.
But also Martin Luther, John Calvin. Like Martin Luther and John Calvin would not, I believe, affirm the authenticity of like non-denominational Christianity. I think they would see it as like a heretical sect. Luther for sure, because Luther thought Calvin was that. So like,
yeah.
But
I think famously Calvin would not admit someone into his group if they didn't fast twice a week.
Wow, I hadn't heard that one. No, but
which is foreign to most of us.
But
anyway.
it's very ironic to me, and like if you never had this thought, sorry, but it always strikes me as funny when I'm sitting in like a non-denominational evangelical church and people are like proudly quoting Luther or Calvin or whoever as if like he's one of us, and I'm like, if Luther rose from the grave and came to this church, he would decry you from the pulpit. You know what I mean? So anyway, so long story short, I always say that as a transition, but what I mean though is that I really got like shaken. And when I say shaken, this is why I'm toying with the word deconstruction, because I was not shaken at any point, thank God, in my belief in God or in my faith that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Messiah and the Savior of the world. At no point was I worried about that. However, I became deeply paranoid that the Jesus that I had been sold by Browncroft and every other, like evangelical experience that I had was a farce. And that the true Jesus was found elsewhere, and that I had been sold a cheap counterfeit. And there was a period of probably a year and a half or maybe 2 years. So like, yeah, probably from like 2017 to like almost 2020, I was in a different kind of dark night where I was very anxious, like at all times, constantly trying to consume more information. And I had this deep, deep fear that the way, right, like the pathway through the narrow gate, right, to true life with Christ was much narrower than I had ever thought. And that most people that I knew that called themselves Christians were horribly deceived, and that we weren't actually Christians at all. And that led me basically to the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't want to spend too much time on that, but my idea...
If you would pause, because I think this is a powerful moment, because I think a lot of our listeners probably relate to a lot of what you just said. I know I have in parts of my own journey as well. Feeling like the Christianity they've known their life is this, modern, inauthentic expression of an ancient thing.
Or I don't know about I might, just for the sake of it, like if not inauthentic, just something that's so shallow that it barely even touches. Like imagine like, there's like this huge nutritious meal spread on the table, right? And God has like offered this Thanksgiving meal. And then I go to a spot and they're only feeding me gravy. And they're like, this is church, this is God. But the entire table has been set. Like I felt like in the evangelical American church, I was just being fed gravy when everything else was there.
Well, and one thing to point out, because I want to hear your response to Gage's question. So there's something very unique about what you both have kind of experienced with kind of this tie to historic Christianity. But as a pastor, there's also something that's kind of universal.
Yeah.
Is we tend to question where we grew up.
Sure.
And so we tend
I haven't not thought about that. Like,
so,
for sure.
So like I meet individuals that follow Jesus that grew up Catholic and all of a sudden they become evangelical.
Right.
And I think it's a powerful thing to think about.
Which was my parents' journey.
Yeah. So I think that in many ways, sometimes we don't sit back and stop and think about like, how much am I responding to what I grew up? So anyways.
And how much are we just like penduluming? You know, like every generation, it's like, oh, mommy and daddy taught me this, so this. And then my kid's going to be like the most modern Christian you've ever seen. Yeah, no.
Right.
Anyway.
So yeah, I know because we've already established you go to Grace Road currently,
Yes.
right? And so you currently
not a Catholic church. Yeah.
Not a Catholic church. It's not even in the grand scheme of things a very liturgical church. It's similar to Browncroft in that it's more, modern evangelical.
Yeah.
So we know this place that you just described you didn't stay in.
Yeah.
But I wanted to acknowledge that because I think it has some weight. So then what?
So I use a lot of analogies, so like we'll see if this works, but I didn't stay there, but imagine that like this journey into historic Christianity was, I went on this quest through these different denominations, and I kind of climbed the pretty predictable ladder. Like I was like most non-denominational churches are effectively Baptist, like theologically speaking, right? So I was like, okay, the next step above Baptist is kind of like Presbyterian, and then you can go like Lutheran, then you can go Anglican, then you go Catholic, then you go Orthodox, right? So like that sort of thing, right? So I like followed the staircase, if that makes sense. And each like step up the staircase, as I was like researching and learning more, even though now I'm like kind of back where I started, I gained a ton of treasure along the way. Like if I went on the Tolkien-esque there and back again, right? I brought the dragon gold back. You know what I mean? And so that being said, what I have realized, and why do I still follow Jesus? Do I think that, like I said, I think Jesus and beauty are inextricably connected, right? So when I started following this staircase, it was because I was following the beauty. Where is ancientness and depth and beauty and art and stuff like that, right? And things that aren't going to blow away in the wind, like the evangelical church, for all its good, like tremendous good, like don't get me wrong, it has a model where we change our aesthetics and our function as quickly as the culture does, right? And there's great positives to be said about that, but at the time I was like, that's not rooted in anything. It's like nothing, right? So I kept climbing up this ladder, and then I started really questioning, because the question was, I realized that if I accept this trail, which is Christ is only found where all this beauty is, right? I have to accept that Christ was not authentically present everywhere else that I've encountered him. And then that was really difficult, because it's one thing, and I still affirm actually that Christ may be being worshipped in a more fuller sense in some of these more historic settings. Maybe. I'm not a theologian. However, I cannot affirm that he was not there working mightily in the least historic Christian environments I've ever been a part of. And so I started really wrestling with like, okay, if the way that church has been done, for as far back as the first century, right, is the only way, which is the claim of a lot of these churches, that this is the only way you can authentically encounter Christ. well, then what about everything that happened to me when I was a kid? What about the evangelicals that brought me out of the dark pit in college? What about the act of, I think, probably conscious grace that that professor granted to me, to pull me out of that hole? God was working in those places mightily, clearly to me. So I think that these...
Hold on one second, though, because I know we want to talk about beauty, but I think this is actually pretty important for our listeners.
Yeah.
Because I think there's... I don't know if
go all day, so you got to direct me.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I think there's a problem in evangelical churches of we need the kids to get it right.
Yes.
And so listening to your story, like you used the word anxiety because you said, hey, I need to get it right. So I'm a parent of two wonderful little girls, and I'm married to a therapist, so like I've accepted I will mess my kids up. I'm a broken, sinful person, but you think about those Bible classes that did so much for you. But I think that part of our generation as millennials struggled with was you need to get it right. And some of us with the anxiety, we went super, super deep.
Yeah.
And so we're like, so you go up the staircase and it's like, well, I have to find the most accurate version of Christianity. And other people, when they start going down the accurate road. And so I think where I want to kind of transition you just for a second is there's the get it right piece that leads people to different directions. But you talked about beauty, but ultimately, if we were to talk about anything that sets Christianity apart, no matter how theologically deep, is love.
Yeah.
It's the power of somebody taking you in, and that's all in your story.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you picked that up. I think too, so yeah, I think absolutely that love is love that other people showed me unconditionally is what has like pulled me along this road. And I think that's God's love being tooled through people, but I think that the other thing that sets Christianity apart from every other faith is the fact that it's about God. It's not about me. And what I mean by that is the fact that in every other faith, as far as I'm aware, you do have to get it right. You have to have the proper knowledge. You have to have the proper behavior. You have to do the right ritual to ensure that you are forgiven or whatever, right? But in Christianity, and this is what I learned going up and down the staircase, in Christianity, it's about your heart, and it's about your intent, and it's about your desire to authentically relate with your Creator. And I'm not saying that just by having, that desire, though C.S. Lewis might argue it. I think that when we read the words of Christ, right, he is constantly admonishing the religious for making it really matter. Is your theology in line with mine? Is your ritual in line with mine? Is my whatever? And Jesus is like, hey, like I'm right here. Like, this is, and I think that so again, like I have tremendous value for like the older traditions now that I didn't have like 5-6 years ago. But I also realized that like where is Jesus found? Where is God's love found? And I think it's found everywhere that he's sought. You know what I mean? I think he will make himself present wherever two or more are gathered in his name, right? As scripture says. And I think that we become, so I recommend everybody, right? Like look into like the deeper, older forms of Christianity, but also remember that Christ came for the meek, and he came for the outliers, right? And he came for where you don't expect to see him, right? That's where he was found, right? So whenever we limit, like, oh, Christ can't be outside these walls that we created, right? Now we're becoming Pharisees, you know? And I think that I had to go there to feel what that would be like, you know what I mean? So I don't know if that worked with what you were saying.
No. I think it did, because I think in this series, I think we want to. I think there's a conception out there. Engage. I'd kind of like you to respond to this. There's a conception out there that, like, verbally will tell people you can't doubt or deconstruct or read a book.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or read a book on open theism.
Yeah, please do. No, my doubts and explorations have only brought me closer to God. And I think, and I'm sure that you can find examples of people that have been led astray, surely. But you know, the idea that, like, I don't know the idiom, but like there's this idea that like truth being like a lion, like you don't have to defend the truth. It just defends itself. You just open the cage, right? Truth exists, and truth is, you know, empowered by an almighty God. So God is not afraid of you looking for the truth. Like, he's there, and he's in control of like what you find and what you don't find, you know what I mean? And I think that when we live in anxiety, that we're not allowed to doubt. We're not allowed to explore. We're not allowed to stumble. Like, I think that separates us from God.
This has been a very rich conversation. Rich, pun intended. We probably need to have you on again, but I kind of want to come to kind of a close. So maybe, why don't you just, before we get to our final remarks, why don't you just kind of wrap up kind of, you have this first experience with beauty.
Yeah.
You know, it almost matches, you know, the story of the disciples. The disciples first meet Jesus, they begin to follow him. And then, however, I grew up Pentecostal, so you have the baptism of the Holy Spirit. We won't, but it's almost as if the first deconstruction was to bring you back to Jesus, and this second deconstruction is it's like a second work of grace.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's almost Methodist. No, but but the idea, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that so I think a good summary of everything that we've talked about is the fact that I am absolutely convinced now of the fact that God has been clearly directing my path each step of the way, in ways that sometimes even appear supernatural. And I think that the highs and lows that I've experienced have been purposeful. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't think that God causes us to sin and then therefore feel the repercussions of our sin, but God directs our lives in such a way that I think that the highs and lows that I have experienced have been very purposely designed by God to make me the man I am today. And I look forward to what he's going to continue to do in that way. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was at Grove City in that dark period, I desperately wanted to leave. And again, when I think back, it's so funny, and it shows me how like ungodly of a position I was in at the time, because when I think back, there was like no reason why I should have wanted to leave, but I like desperately wanted to get away. You know what I mean? And so I applied to a number of schools all over the place. Like, I shotgunned applications out there to schools that were way below my resume, effectively, and I got denied from every one. And now you may be thinking, wow, maybe you weren't as smart as you thought. No, but what I'm saying is, it literally, like, multiple people commented that they were like, it makes no sense that you didn't get into any of those schools. Like, there's no sense to it. And I think God was clearly putting up a barrier because he had something for me at Grove City. And if I had left, none of that stuff that I told you about would have happened. And I think he put me through the ringer of applying to all these schools and getting rejection letter after rejection letter that made zero sense, so that I would like he was like, I want you here. Feel all these doors that should be open. I'm closing them one after another. So you realize that I don't want you to go through any, you know? So trust him, people. Yeah.
Tweet that. Well, we're definitely gonna have to have you back on again.
Yeah.
You know what?
So much more we could get.
We haven't even talked about Forefront yet.
Well, you know, we have done some Christmas episodes.
That's true.
I guess what we can do with Forefront too is we always like to make podcasting decisions. We have a third series coming up. We're calling it Questions of Our Day, also known as Spicy Questions. One of our co-hosts, Alyssa Matz. I think we have a place for you in
Hot
that
takes.
series.
Let's do it.
All right. Final remarks. Gage, where do you want to go?
All right. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Like we've already said, there so much, so many conversations we've opened that we could get so much deeper into. I so appreciate our friendship. I so appreciate your journey, your honesty, your openness, sharing it with us. A million things, but I'm gonna maybe a little ambitiously try to wrap up two themes that came out from this conversation to me. And one was the predictable, the beauty aspect, because we knew coming in this conversation we were going to talk about that. But then the other thing I didn't know coming in here was that theme you just hit on pretty heavily with that doors analogy is God's hand, God's guiding hand, and I would say even redeeming hand.
Yeah.
And I think those two beautifully wrap together because it's in fact the beauty God makes out of our wandering or tragedy that befalls us or around us, darkness in the world, that I think is so powerful. It wouldn't be, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm gonna not resist the temptation right now to mention Tolkien in an episode on beauty. And I just can't help thinking of the opening.
And 90% of what we talked about was C.S. Lewis. Fight.
Yeah,
Anyways,
let's go. Well, I can't resist thinking of the beginning, the opening of the Silmarillion, where, you know, for our listeners who aren't familiar,
I purposely chose not to go there, so thank you.
Excellent. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's this gorgeous poetic narrative where this God figure in Tolkien's world universe, the creator figure, has created these beings, these angelic-like beings, and wants to invite them into the role of co-creating with him Middle-earth. And he does it via song. You can't hit any harder on the beauty and art metaphor here, right? Or the creator metaphor. And so and
Aslan creates Narnia through song as well.
That's true. Yeah. They were friends, so it makes sense. But in the Silmarillion, this work of Tolkien, the God figure invites these angelic beings into creating Middle-earth through song, but then some of them start singing dissonantly. We talked a minute about resonance, but some of them start singing dissonantly and at first seeming to throw off the song. And this happens time and time again, but each time Tolkien's God character weaves the discord into a new layer of the song, more beautiful than it was before.
Yeah.
Read the opening to the Silmarillion. It's way more beautiful than I paraphrased just now.
I got a quick, really practical one for you. Ready? Who's seen The Prince of Egypt? Come on.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So The Prince of Egypt, I talk about epics in my 9th grade class, right? Foundational epics. So we talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey for the Greeks, right? And then I talk about the Exodus for a Judeo-Christian society, right? The Exodus, pretend for a minute that the Exodus was an entirely fictional story. Absolutely incredible drama. Incredible story, right? Like, the Prince of Egypt is, you know, found in a basket and he's a Hebrew and then he goes and frees his people against his brother, like incredible, right? The God puts, the Pharaoh kills the firstborn sons, right? Which of course prefigures Christ, which is insane, right? But the Pharaoh kills the firstborn sons. She puts her baby in a basket, all these horrible things, right? Moses kills a man and runs away into the desert, right? All these horrible experiences create a beautiful drama. And that's what God's doing out here. He's creating a beautiful drama and he's using us to do it. And dramas are pretty boring if there's no downslides. So like if you're in a bad spot right now, it's part of God's awesome story,
Well, I'll just give 2 final remarks because actually we went out of order, but that was great.
Sorry.
I had a professor in college. He was actually a Greek professor. His name was Wes Smith, had a huge impact on my life. The one phrase he repeated to us always was, make Jesus believable and beautiful and visible to every person you meet. And I get a little emotional thinking about it because, in this episode, I want to put beautiful first or third. But there's something about when Jesus is believable, he then becomes beautiful and then becomes visible. And I think about that. And the last thought that I have, having 2 little girls, we're reading the Jesus Storybook Bible.
Nice.
I'm going to butcher this line, but there's a story about this woman named Leah that everyone thinks is ugly. And Sally Lloyd Jones in this, she has this beautiful phrase that hopefully somebody will get right. But, God thought Leah was beautiful and therefore she was beautiful. Like it was just this play on words that, and just hearing your story in a very simplistic, God thought Rich was beautiful, therefore he was beautiful, and, Gage. And I think that it's the beauty and it's the outsideness of the story that brings us back. Rich, we're going to talk about Forefront at some point, but just tell people where to go.
Check out what we do at forefrontfestival.com, and you can check us out on like Instagram and Twitter and stuff at forefrontfest, FEST. But and come to our artist circle, 3rd Thursdays of every month. Yeah, look it up.
Awesome.
You don't have to be an artist, you just have to love beautiful stuff and friends. Come on out.
Thank you so much for joining us. You can find us at the whygodwhypodcast.com. Click the subscribe button. You'll get this episode and many other ones like it. Thank you so very much.